increased class sizes, otherwise known as scaling up, those words we hear and dread oftentimes. With us today we have four esteemed colleagues. Kurt Spryer is a continuing lecturer in environmental science, policy and management, and an environmental historian. He's been teaching, I always say this wrong, ESPM, right, 50 AC, Introduction to Culture and Natural Resource Management since 2005. This is the biggest, if not is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, AC courses on campus with 400 plus students. And despite it being such a large class, he offers students a lot of choices in doing different kinds of creative and community-based projects. So I hope you'll elaborate more on that aspect during the discussion, Kurt. Emily Zazulia is an assistant professor of music with expertise on music of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. She teaches courses that range from very specialized research seminars to broad introductory courses for both music majors and non-majors. And a favorite recent course was entitled Love and Love Songs in the Middle Ages. As a result of her seminar doubling in size, she's done more peer-to-peer activities that have been particularly effective in her class. And thank you in particular for being here on your sabbatical. Robin Ball is a lecturer in the molecular and cell biology department, teaching courses in physiology and neuroscience. Her largest course is Introduction to Human Physiology, which has grown to 400 plus students last fall. She uses clickers extensively, and we look forward to hearing more about her innovations in this area. Josh Hugg is an assistant teaching professor in computer science. Courses he has taught include data structures, an intense technical course with 1,500 students and a 240 course staff members, which to me is a small corporation. So the social implications of computing, a discussion-based course with 250 students and 1 TA, and rule-based and generative art freshman seminar with 20 students. In a 27 op-ed in the Daily Californian, one of his students said, quote, his projects, homeworks, and labs were entertaining and engaging, displaying the time and thought that went into each of them. He was somehow able to make a 1,400 person class feel a little smaller. And I don't think there's anything more you can ask of a professor, especially at a school as large as UC Berkeley. So welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
So this is a discussion. So don't reply to me, reply to them. And as we said, it is being recorded. So for each of you, if you could, starting with Kurt, tell us a little bit about your teaching philosophy and style and how it works in relation to your larger classes.
So as you said, my class, Introduction to Culture and Natural Resource Management, has grown from about 140 students in 2005 to as many as 480 recently. And that's certainly presented a lot of challenges, but I think a lot of those challenges are the same ones that I faced when the class was smaller. They're just amplified. It's an American cultures course, which is really something that I love teaching and offers me an opportunity to fulfill my own interest in providing opportunities for engagement for students with community partners and engagement with a range of creative projects. Which is sort of what I manifest in the course. But I think there's also challenges that I have in dealing with a course where quite a few students are there because it's a requirement. So I think that in the most obvious way this is manifest is in what I would describe as a bimodal grade distribution at the end. In the eyes of students anyway, that's how it's seen. Where we have maybe a quarter of the students who are not in the end doing so well. They all wind up moving on to a pass, no pass option at some point, and the others who get very engaged. So on the one hand, I have to orient my approach toward the students who are interested or potentially interested, and also keep the others accountable. I just say that in terms of teaching philosophy, I don't really know that I have any pithy way to describe that. I just say that I try to be very honest about who I am with students, try not to impose or sort of reproduce the hierarchies that are so much a part of education here at Cal and elsewhere in higher education. First thing I tell them is call me Kurt. Don't call me Professor Spryer or Dr. Spryer. But they can if they want to, because I also respect that there are people who have that sort of need. And so I just say that I try, particularly in my lectures, to be open, keep things interesting, be humorous, if at all possible, keep people engaged in such a large classroom, while obviously delivering the content that needs to be delivered. I'm more interested in students learning about concepts than the actual content. I assume that in 2 or 3 years they're not going to remember 80% of what I teach them, but if they can remember some concepts and bring those into their lives and become more civically literate, I would say that's a key goal. And I really want them to be able to move beyond the bounds of transactional learning and in some ways hopefully transcend their anxiety around grades and so on. So that involves setting up systems that are clearly defined but allow for a great deal of maneuvering and openness for the way they may approach projects and so on. I'll leave it at that.
All right. So I'm pleased to be here for in part because pretty soon I'm going to be charged with teaching our 400-something person class, but that's not why I'm part of this panel now. That's just a side benefit of getting to hear from everyone else's wisdom. But in the class that I teach, that where increased class size has really become a concern, is our gateway music history class for our music majors. This is the kind of class that for many of our peer institutions is taught at about 20 students with a ratio. When I took a similar class as an undergrad, it was about a ratio of 1 student for every 6, one instructor for every 6 students or so. It was very intensive. Here I have 50 to 60 students, limited only by the size of the room. We end up turning away, saying, well, maybe you can take it next year. And 1 GSI, so the ratio's a bit different there. But many of the goals of this class are introducing ideas about what it can mean to study music history, why it's more important than just reading the bio at the front of your piano score or something, that it is a fully fledged discipline of the humanities and not sort of cocktail trivia. And to teach students, I echo a lot of what Kurt's just said in terms of philosophy of teaching. Especially in terms of focusing on methods and the things you can do rather than the content delivery. But in terms of this course in particular, I think about trying to introduce the idea that you can do research in music. Like it's not just a thing that you do in the sciences or, if you work in the lab. That research is ongoing. I try to introduce them to at least give them a flavor of what it is that I do the rest of the time, and to give them the opportunity to undertake, research projects themselves in the course of this class, and to at least cue them up to where they might go if this is something they're interested in. This is supposed to be taken ideally at a sophomore, junior level, so they still have some time in the course of their studies here. But the things that I've been thinking about that are relevant to the panel are how do you deliver a seminar-style experience and this sort of emphasis on discussion and close reading and working with sources and not just a lecture situation, getting to know each of the students when I have 50 or 60 people in the room. And so, we can talk a bit later about a few of the strategies I've taken, to try to shrink the feeling of this class, which in comparison to the rest of the panelists is not so large actually, but in terms of the kind of engagement I'm trying to achieve with our students, I know it's not unique to this class. Across the university, we've got classes that, ideally would involve discussion, but wanting that to take place not just with our GSIs in the context of section, but, with primary instructors as well.
So in our department, most of our classes are taught by 3 professors, and I'm a lecturer, so I just kind of get a piece of a class. And so I'm teaching 4 pieces of classes. There are 4 different classes right now. And so I kind of have to just go with the flow of what the other professors do. So for one class, the other professor hates technology, so we only do chalkboard. And then for other classes, it's all PowerPoint, and so I kind of am flexible that way. But one thing that I try to do in all my classes is to have students talk to each other. So even in my big class, that's 400. That one I can teach all by myself. So that one's like my ideal class. But I do ask the students to turn to the person next to them and talk to each other. So using clickers is really good for that. This semester in my smaller classes, I use something called Poll Everywhere, which worked out really well because the other professors were not doing that, so I didn't want to have like points attached to it. And even in other classes, just like asking the students for the first time to, here's a problem to work on, talk to each other. They'll be kind of hesitant. I'm like, no, like really, talk to each other. And then like the ice is broken and they, it becomes more interactive and more exciting. And I think that's a really important way for them to learn the material. So that's something I try and do. And also things that our other panelists already said is like focusing on the concepts and not on the details. So, they've learned a lot of material. Sometimes by the time they get to my classes, I see a lot of seniors. And so I'll try and incorporate things from other classes, like here's a problem or here's a figure from a paper, can you explain this? And so it's trying to get them to think about the logic and kind of putting things together from different pieces. So that's a pretty important part. And also, another thing I do in all my classes is I draw. So either if I have a PowerPoint, I'm drawing on the PowerPoint or I'm drawing on the chalkboard. And I feel like that's helpful too. So I have to warn students before I teach that they should bring a pen with them. Sometimes it's just, their PowerPoint or their laptop. And also like same philosophy of just being approachable to the students. I also tell them to call me by my first name and have lots of office hours. I give extra credit for coming to office hours for one of my classes. So just trying to get them to interact with us, interact with the GSIs and with each other as well.
Great. I guess I'll focus on the Giganto 1,500 person class. So data structures, I basically have more or less 3 goals. One is to build them into independent problem solvers and programmers. So they've already taken another programming class. This is the second in a sequence. So I want them to be able to actually solve problems from scratch using real world tools. Second, I want them to get this sense that they are actually capable of this. So to build a sense of independence, and belief in your own self. And third is getting them to understand that the reason that companies are willing to hire and pay them a relatively large amount straight out of undergrad, way more than I did for sure, is that they have something that's very valuable and powerful and that they need to consider the impacts of what they'll do. And I guess actually as a fourth goal that I'm kind of sneaking in this time is trying to build a better sense of how one can work effectively on a team, though that's something I'm trying this semester. So the class, basically there's 4 things that they do. There's lecture, and some students don't go to lecture at all, right? Some watch the lectures that are pre-recorded. Some of them just read the textbook that we wrote that's just literally basically the lectures. So we have basically many different channels that they can select from for the lecture part of the class. Discussion, well, we have 3 different types of discussion because we have an insanely heterogeneous population from students who've been programming since they were like 8, it seems like, to people that just started this year. So we have different discussions that they self-select on. We have labs, and we have 2 different types of labs. Same deal. And then we have the homeworks and projects. And in each of the homeworks and projects, we have basically a basic set of goals and then things you can do to go beyond and then beyond if you so choose. And for each of those projects, because they're pretty big, we prepare mostly the videos that I put together where I will give them ways to get started and thoughts about how to approach them. Because I really ideally want everybody to be able to pick the goal that is big enough for them and then have the resources to achieve that goal. And that's kind of a fractal thing that occurs throughout the class. In terms of the inspiration, when I train my TAs, I let them know they have 2 jobs. One is to help students through the technical content, but the other is to actually inspire them and recognize that we're all human beings. And ultimately, this is like human beings interacting with each other, doing human things. And so I make sure that when I'm hiring TAs and tutors that we're really trying to get people who are going to have that human angle front and center. And that's important for inclusivity and inspiration, and also, I think, getting students to recognize the impact of their future work. So that's the short version. Call it there.
Thank you.
You got it.
Well, Kurt said something that was really intriguing to me about keeping large numbers accountable. So how do you keep large numbers accountable?
Well, as I said, there is certainly an obsession with grades.
Yeah.
Is there not? And so, as much as I'm reluctant to focus on that, I certainly use that as sort of a way to achieve a baseline for participation and engagement. My philosophy with it is really, on the one hand, that I want to offer students all of the resources and opportunities to be able to achieve an A in the course. There's no reason in an introductory course like this, with really what many students consider fascinating material, that's personally meaningful in many cases, that there's any reason they should not be able to get an A if they put the effort in and, you know, have the ability, which of course all these very good students do. So in that sense, I set up assignments and exams and so on to be pretty challenging, and grade them down a little bit. Of course, that may not be the kind of grading down that in some departments, you know, takes place, but you know, they may wind up with a B average on the exam, or a B minus average or something on the midterm exam and on some of their assignments. But then I give them all sorts of opportunities for extra credit. I give them opportunities to really show what they can do in their final projects. And so in that sense, I think that's one way, in terms of, okay, are you actually doing the work? The other way, the other means of assuring people are doing the work is, again, somewhat reluctantly, I force quizzes on them every week. And so I do this through B courses, multiple choice questions. I have a question bank for each week of maybe 50 questions, and they're randomly generated on B courses in different categories, and they answer about 10 of those. And that's in some ways it's only maybe 70, 80 points of their final 1,000-point total for the course, for their grade, but it has a catalyzing effect. They're very concerned about these things. So those are some of the ways. The other thing is I provide a lot of opportunities for them to interface with the GSIs and myself. So again, showing themselves. If they are motivated, if they're engaged, it's not that hard to keep them accountable. If they're not, I sort of have the traps to identify who's not really paying attention. The other thing is I do my best to not have them use their electronic devices in class for anything other than course-related things. That's a terrible situation, I think, that we probably all face in one way or another. And I send my GSIs out on patrol early and often. And there are consequences. 25 points off your 1,000 points for the first offense,
Whoa. 50
for the second, 100 for the third, and fourth offense you fail. Now,
How many do you
frankly,
actually give out? Penalties?
We give a lot of 25-point penalties out early, and that's usually it. You know, kind of warning. I don't know.
Interesting.
Very, you know.
Do you have a whistle that you blow?
Very ambivalent about this.
Or do they have a whistle they blow? Or
Well, we do a little bit of that too. Hey, what's going on over there? Who are you talking to? You know, that kind of thing. It really, it's kind of a little dramatic performance early in the semester around the whole issue. Also, the old click and run. Another issue, posting GSIs at the door. It's horrible. Nobody wants to have to deal with it. So we try to dramatize it early and hopefully get past it. It doesn't always work that way.
Anybody else want to add to what Curtis said about keeping large numbers accountable?
I do something similar with B courses, except they're homeworks, and so it's not timed, and they get 2 chances to get the right answer. But it's the same thing after every single class. There's a homework due before the next class, and it's all graded automatically. And I think it helps them keep up with the material. And the lowest, I think one thing that's helpful in these large classes is to drop like the low scores. So if someone is sick or what, like they don't have to talk to me about it. They just, you know, that's the one that's dropped. So we drop like the lowest 3.
How big are these question banks? So do you actually have problems with students trying to share answers with the questions on these or not? Do you know?
Yes.
Yeah, got it.
Yes. I've been teaching this course for 15 years. I switch things up quite often, but there's only so much I can do, and I have problems with archives of papers, archives of old exams, archives of everything, and people collaborating on the quizzes. This time, for the first time ever, this semester, I explicitly wrote in the syllabus that if they do collaborate on things that they are not to do so on, it's a violation of academic integrity and so on. Now, to actually be able to catch them at this, you know,
Be tough. Well, it's funny because when I taught the Intro to AI class, they had a set of such quizzes, and it gave you infinite guesses. So students, if you gave them infinite guesses, would just guess until they got it. And then in the course evaluations, they would actually complain and say, well, I would like to not be given the opportunity to basically guess my way. I really liked the idea, but I found it too stressful, and I'm optimizing my time. But then we do the opposite, then they're stressed out about the problem. So I don't know. I always want to do something like that, but I can never find anything that I'm totally happy with.
We used to do it in section, but then it just takes time, valuable time.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Emily, you talked about this idea of trying to make the class seem more intimate because you've got larger numbers and you want to make it seminar style. How are you getting students to take leadership and control? Because in a seminar style, a lot of that is led by students and in larger numbers. How do you get them going and get that mindset going?
So one of the things I did the last time I taught this course, I got about 3 weeks into the semester and thought, this is not working with this, the just opening up and saying, let's have a discussion, right? So I instituted for the second unit of the course, which was about 5 weeks long, that for each of the Tuesdays, I had assigned an article. And so I wanted them to read the article, think about it. Part of the goal here is to teach them how to read academic literature, because that is not a skill that one is born with necessarily, and sometimes the authors don't do you a lot of help. So I wanted the feeling of a seminar there where you might have a discussion amongst about 10 students. So I split them up in the course. So in each of the 5 weeks, these 5 course meetings, they'd one time be on essentially a panel, essentially like the seminar, and they would be the group, the 10 and me, responsible for carrying on a discussion. But now you don't want the other 40 or 50 to be sitting there and suddenly have license to, not engage, even though they aren't invited to speak for the bulk of the class. So what I did pretty successfully, I think, was set up a Google document that I actually told them to bring their electronic devices those days, made exceptions, and my GSI moderated what was essentially a live blog of the discussion we were having. So they might say, oh, wait, what was it that James just said? I missed that, and someone would chime in and say, oh, he was making this point from the reading, or link to something on Wikipedia or elsewhere, or sometimes they actually made jokes and things about, it was the kind of side conversation, but focused, and my GSI was helpful in in pointing up and saying, Susan just said something really important here. Did you catch that? And they can all follow along. Google Docs keeps a record of everyone's contribution, so that was a helpful way I framed it to them as you may not feel comfortable putting up your hand and speaking in front of a class of 50 or 60, but this is a way to take part in a discussion without having to have all eyes on you. And so if that's a particular challenge for you, make sure you take part in this aspect of the discussion so I can give you credit for having taken part. And so I tried to make that a positive in terms of ways of engaging with the class. And the other benefit was we now have these logs of the discussion. It was sort of a crowdsourced notes thing. And I could look back at the end and see which students hadn't contributed anything and sent them an email, and said, you were here, what, there are consequences for not taking part. And then we'd open up at the end for the last 15 minutes or so of class where the silent majority in this case could weigh in on what were some of the points that were made there that maybe we overlooked in the main discussion or that they wanted to have. This was just one, I did other sort of group activities, not just, the normal pair up and share your ideas, but taking responsibility for different parts of an argument, splitting them up into small groups of 5 or so and say, okay, you all are tasked with answering this question. Or for one session, I put up a series of about 10 questions around the room and had them circle through and add notes, to this board. So we had different points of evidence being brought to bear on the different questions that arose out of this article, or, ways at getting at discussion that aren't just let's sit around and talk. And there was still possibility for students to sort of, fade into the background, but it was harder. and my GSI, who was wonderful, could go around and like prompt them. The other thing that I did, akin to the accountability, was having them do just weekly reading responses. And they have to do a certain number. Having them turned in, 5 or midnight the day before class meant I could read them. We get ideas for what our discussion will actually be about, get ideas for what questions we can put up around the room to talk about, and also I can tell who's struggling. It sort of makes a possibility for an early intervention in a way, whether it's slagging off or whether it's just, I don't get what we're doing, and so figuring out who needs a little more attention that they may not have brought that attention on themselves in a class setting, but that was one of the explicit goals of those responses in that setting.
I wonder, with your weekly reading responses, is that a time issue for your GSIs or for yourself? I mean, grading them, do you give extensive feedback? How do you do that?
No, I don't give them feedback unless it's a problem. Sometimes I'll say, this is awesome, this idea you had here. It's no more than a sentence. Unless there's really an issue, it's a pass, a no check situation. They have to complete, 9 out of 12 or something in the course of the semester. My GSI and I both looked over them, and I did the, have you completed this, in part to prepare for leading the discussion. Are the people who are going to be taking part going to be on top of things, or are we going to have some problems? So anticipating how the discussion is going to go in a way that you can't always do actually in a seminar setting. And sometimes you can sit down there and no one has read the thing, and you're like, we got 90 more minutes. Right?
Yeah.
But that did take time. It's time I felt was worthwhile, but that's absolutely at that level not scalable for 400 students unless you've got the GSI is responsible for just 50 or so a piece, and they can send in the best ones, and keep track of who are their students who are in danger of falling behind. But professor themselves shouldn't, I don't think, be reading 400 paragraphs, and they were short, right? It's not like a paper, but 100 to 200 words. One of my colleagues actually this term has done limiting their responses to basically like a tweet, like 100 characters or so, in order to get some, to focus on the kind of writing of really getting to the point and not sort of doing the thing that I thought was interesting in this reading we did for today, which was
Yes.
entitled,
Yeah.
but saying, I thought this was interesting, pooped, moving on. So forcing them to focus and also alleviating some of the burden of really long reading as well.
Other ways that you all are doing this, making something so large seem so human and intimate.
I mean, one thing that I do for sure is after projects or homeworks are done, I reflect a little bit on, for example, we had a project where after it was out and done, I did a walkthrough where I recorded a video, just how I would do it. And in that particular case, I did not also talk about specific student solutions, but I do that in some lectures where I'll take actual student work and critique it in front of the class and just talk about pitfalls or things that popped up that I think are notable. So I think just closing the feedback loop and making it feel like you're actually part of the course. And I think another part is just having all the material of the course feel like an integrated whole, so that the lectures and the projects actually talk about each other. It makes the class a little more brittle, so if you change anything, you have to change more stuff. But I find, at least since I'm focusing just on this one class, it's well worth it. So I'd say deep integration and feedback, keeping things all as part of a nice feedback loop.
Yeah, in one of my classes, in the sections, we kind of do something similar where the students will read journal articles ahead of time before class, and then since it's science, there's figures, and so we split the class up into different groups for each figure, 4 or 5 people per figure, and they discuss it together. We walk around and help them out, and then one person in each group is responsible for explaining it to the class. So that's kind of another way of doing it.
Yeah, I think of really a challenge of cohort building, almost short-term cohort building for the class, and within that there are subgroups, and of course the sections provide the the sort of primary arena for that. We do a lot of group work in sections, but also the extra credit projects that I have students work on really serve to build that. So for instance, last fall we had about 150 students who got together and worked with an organization, 350.org, to support this enormous art project in San Francisco associated with the Climate March. And that just built a sense of cohesion and intimacy, and that group was the core of the class for the rest of the semester. But there were smaller projects. Next Friday, we have a bio blitz on Strawberry Creek here, and we'll probably have 50 students working on that. And so just getting that sense of sort of teamwork and just opportunities to connect, with each other. It's pretty valuable.
I think one other thing is that, especially in a technical course where it feels like you're just part of some gigantic grinding machine, is to bring back the human angle a lot. I mean, it's just really important. Like, I share as much as myself as feels appropriate and I feel comfortable in lectures. And another thing is I explicitly talk about how I'm trying to develop them as a whole person. So we talk about, let's say growth mindset versus fixed mindset, that kind of thing, like in the middle of a lecture about binary search trees, because why not? Because you can do that. It's up to you. Yeah. So be humans.
So we've talked a lot about many positive, great things that you're doing. Robin, I'll start with you. What's the biggest challenge you're still facing in scaling up?
Yeah. In my largest class, I have a hard time controlling the class, so I don't want to have a ban on electronic devices. I don't want to be like the police officer of the class. And so I know people are probably, looking at other stuff, and that's okay as long as it's not bothering the people around them. But it's like the 5 minutes at the end of the class period where they just start talking, and so I have to have discussions with them, and the GSIs will have discussions with them, but it still is a major problem. And they say they have to leave early to get to another class because there's a quiz or something. And so I don't really know what to do about that. It's just it's a large number of people in a large room, and if anyone has other advice.
The thing
Yeah.
I've done, I haven't taught the huge class here, but before coming to Cal, I had about 150 or so, but in the lecture hall. And the thing I did that worked pretty well on those counts was having those who wanted to use laptops sit on the edges, so that you've got the engaged people in the middle, and those who had to leave early, on any days they have to leave early, sit in the back. To ask them to take responsibility for not being take responsibility for your own decisions, but don't disrupt everybody else.
Right.
And so sort of spatially marginal for those who are choosing for whatever reason. Then you don't have to ask what reason it is that they have their laptop, whether it's some accessibility issue or whether it's because they need to buy a pair of shoes. That the people behind them are not them. And me, I found that I was seeing the students who are, think that they're being very, very coy, but to have that front and center was really distracting to me. So maybe it was selfish more than anything, but something I attempted. It doesn't work well in the classroom I have now because there's as many seats as there are students, and there aren't really wings like there are in a lecture room, but it's back in there.
Yeah, I tell students about the cone of distraction,
Yeah.
right, at the beginning of the semester, and really try to make them think about it in terms of sort of courtesy and responsibility and that sort of thing. As far as leaving early, I had an incident just on Wednesday that was very frustrating. I had a number of students sort of get up. I think it's spring. They have a little spring fever going on. And they got up and they were all in the back. And I know who those people are. They're the ones in the back. They're always in the back. And they kind of got up en masse, like there was a chain reaction pretty quick. And so I, with about 2 minutes left, said, as they now left, I said, all right, everybody get out your clickers. We're gonna take attendance. And of course, then I had to run over about a minute to really finish my lecture, and then I got a number of frustrated emails from students who claimed I held them hostage. So today I've been drafting an opening clicker question that revolves around the police investigation of the hostage taking. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I've done that where I put a clicker question at the end that was gonna be extra credit, and they had to get it right. Usually they don't have to get these questions right, but I just threw that at the end, and so whoever was there, and got it right, I made it pretty easy. So
Well, this was actually
gave them extra
you would
credit.
have points deducted.
Right. Okay.
Do you require attendance in your class?
I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Kind
they
of.
get points for using
Soft.
clickers.
Okay, got it.
Just
I
a few
can't
points.
because I have twice as many people as seats, so whatever. I don't have that problem.
So that's your challenge, is you can't.
I mean, it's yeah.
Well, on that note, I mean, is
Yeah.
there any way to track for those who are not attending in person? Are you looking up, or, I mean, I would think this would be a lot of work, but checking to see if they're watching the recordings or, accessing.
Yeah, so we have a weekly survey on an honor system, and I guess people can lie, but at least gives us a rough picture. I give something known as a pacing point if you go to things, but the pacing points only get you up to a B minus, so doesn't affect most people. But yeah, but it still feels like points. So it gives me a rough picture, but I have no idea how accurate the weekly survey self-reported attending things numbers are.
So they fill out the survey basically reporting how they engage with that week's lecture.
Yeah, they basically said, did you go to lecture, or did you watch the webcast, or did you do neither? Yeah.
And the pacing points, is that like a group? Is that weighted in the final grade?
It's just a flat points added at the end as extra credit, but it's extra credit that has a cap on its ultimate effect on you.
Right.
So yeah, it's kind of like a recovery point of sorts. Yeah, that gets you up to a B minus. I have incredibly Byzantine policies. I'm happy to share. Yeah.
Are there other questions? I've been so engrossed in the discussion, I've forgotten to look for questions, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a thread of conversation where you were talking about sort of these natural modes of expression that seem to resonate with people, the collective Google note-taking and the tweeting of things.
Mm.
Are there other natural modes of expression that you found to really resonate with students
Mm-hmm.
to get them to engage?
Yeah, competition
Mm.
helps a lot. So yeah, I wanted to talk about this case study competition I do in my large lecture. It doesn't really, I don't feel like it makes it seem small because the groups are like 100 people in each group, but I hand out a worksheet that has different case studies in it, and we just physically separate the class. There's aisles that run through the lecture hall and say like this group here does number 1 and 2 and so on. And so then they work on it and try and come up with the answer to the case study, but they don't know exactly what I'm going to ask. And then we do clicker questions for each group. And the group that gets the highest percentage gets like half of a point of extra credit, but they're not really, I don't think it's the point really, that's the motivation, they just want to win. And so when I say like, oh, group 4 wins, they're like, they're so excited. So I think that's a good way to get people engaged.
If you have projects or homeworks where they build something creative that they like sharing off, I just have people make YouTube videos and I get like over 1,000 a semester. Give them a little tiny bit of credit. And I also survey them so that they feel like they're involved in the way that the course is run. So I have a pre-semester, mid-semester, and post-semester survey, and also weekly surveys that are very, very short. But I at least give them a chance to give us feedback a lot. Not quite the same thing, but I say the YouTube thing for their work is really fun. Just having them show it off. Yeah.
Well, that's why I asked. It was,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, I sometimes feel a little just out of touch
Mm.
with the way that students communicate these days. We used to write letters,
Mm-hmm.
but asking students to write anything seems like it's just torture these days. But I had an unexpected hit asking them to do 1-minute videos.
Mm-hmm.
And a colleague said, well, of course, because they're on the Institute all the time.
Yeah.
That's how they can.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of grasping for
Yeah.
analogous methods.
And I'd say that I struggle with this question in a lot of ways, and I think that yes, getting them to write anything can be torture, and they feel like it's an imposition on them somehow. It slows down whatever it is that they want to do, and takes the precious time away. But at the same time, I think that many students, certainly not all, but many, are really craving opportunities to express themselves intellectually and really learn something in a deeper way. And so one of the things I do, and I can talk about it in a little more detail in another context, but my final projects offer the assignment offers a range of options, and one of them is to do arts projects. And so this is it's a social sciences and humanities course with some ecology in it, but then doing arts, creative arts. And in the end, we have an art show. We've been doing this for about 4 or 5 semesters. We have maybe 50 to 70 students who do this every semester. We have an organization we collaborate with in Berkeley, and we put on the show there, and then have the other students come for extra credit. And it's a smash hit. Another thing we do is offer students an opportunity to make documentaries, not a minute, maybe 5 to 10 minute documentaries for their final projects, and then we have them and others who are doing performance projects present at Docugonza-Palooza at the end of the semester, and it's another big hit.
I'm at the beginning of the medium-sized class. Would be nice if it were much larger. So I heard that Josh, I heard in the intro that you have a ginormous team with multiple layers. I wrote down all the different touch points you have in your class, but maybe starting with you and other suggestions, what are some of your strategies for scaling? I started, my original teaching role was 10-person high-touch coaching, giving individual people specific feedback. And I try to keep that in my class, but right now I'm at 77 students, so that doesn't work.
Yep.
So I'm trying to turn everything sideways.
So the question, how do you organize a staff into being hierarchical effectively, or
How do
Where's how
you
we're gonna
use
staff?
the different parts of your staff?
got it?
What are the different roles you have?
Yeah, it's pretty complicated, so I'll try and keep
Where
it
did you
short.
start?
I mean, I started in the sense that I organically grew, because the first time I taught this class, it was only 2 sections of 200 people, and I had a total of something like 12 TAs, and I've grown to 49 TAs and like 40 tutors and 160 academic interns. So it kind of came over time.
So TA, just if you could break down TA
Yeah.
or academic intern, what are they?
Sure. So I have 2 types of TAs, or I guess 3. So there's 49 total TAs, 48 of whom are undergraduates, and 1 of whom is a grad student. There are about half of them are 20-hour TAs, and the other half are 8-hour TAs. The 8-hour TAs do only classroom stuff. They do no development. They do a little bit of mentorship, but their job is mostly to be ready to go talk in front of a class, but they're using a script, and they don't have to be going above and beyond, and they don't even need to do all of the assignments themselves, although many of them have because they've been through the class. The 20-hour TAs, they are part of teams. So we have something like 9 different teams. So examples of teams are the Struggling Students team. They look out for struggling students. They create interventions. They hold workshops on, say, imposter syndrome, whatever else. We do just so much stuff in-house just because we have such a giant staff. Another example of a team is the Plagiarism Detection team. And they run the infrastructure to detect plagiarism, and they help me deal with those cases, though I have to do some of it because they can't. I have the exam QA team. I'm sort of a control freak about exams, so I write every single bit of every bit of the exam. Everything's there, but they help me proofread it. So, I mean, and I have more teams that I could go through if you're curious. But basically, the 20-hour TAs, they have an overlap. They each belong to something like 2 or 3 teams, and they're in charge of typically 1. And then I have a subset of the 20-hour TAs who are head TAs, and their job, which they don't do well because I haven't figured out how to manage appropriately, is to make sure that the other 20-hour TAs are actually keeping things on task. Though I've failed 2 semesters in a row at being at this new infrastructure for classes to actually have the TAs actually track the progress of the other TAs, because they're all very busy because they're undergraduates, and a 20-hour position is a lot of work for them. So that's more or less the TA landscape, as brief as I can get it. Tutors, they teach 5-person small sections. That's their main duty. So that's they get together. We form groups of 5 students who work with a tutor, and it's group tutoring. That's their title, group tutor. And they occasionally help out with other things, but that's their main job. And they also drop by office hours too. And then lastly, academic interns are former students. There's no actual requirements. Anybody who's like taken the class, I don't even like require any specific grade. they come to lab and office hours to some degree, and they just help out as people are trying to get through the homeworks and projects. And they're tough to manage. And I have a 20-hour TA team that manages them. But that's definitely one of the parts that feels shadiest to me about our enterprise, is that it's hard to train that many people to teach correctly, I'll say. Not just give away things, to be professional. There's just, a few complaints percolate to me that I'm unhappy with. I'm a little scared of how that goes. So that's the very quick version.
I teach coaching, I'll give you a couple
Oh, yeah.
ideas
Yeah,
for how
great.
to ask questions and not be directive, not tell the answer, but
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah. And ways to teach that to other people, I'm very curious. But yeah.
that's
Yeah, so that's my very fast picture of the staff. Yeah.
For the ones that are using clickers in class, are you also using closed caption?
Yeah.
What was the other word? Close caption? Course caption.
Just like webcasts where it records and heads up on B courses.
What's the connection between those two?
I didn't use clickers. This is my first time here and teaching, and so we have about 300 people, and I guess attendance dwindles through the year, and it
Yeah.
gets down to 20%, so it was about
Mhm.
50
Oh.
Yep.
out of the 300 behind, but I didn't, no points for participation.
Right.
So I think
That
I'll go the
helps.
clicker group,
Mm-hmm.
and I was gonna cut the course capture, but I think that might
Mm-hmm.
too.
I think that's sort of the inevitable, tendency, right, is to have attrition over the course of the semester once students figure out they don't need to be there.
Yeah.
So that's one reason I require it, and I feel like webcasting would undermine that in a
So you
sense,
don't do it?
unfortunately. I don't. Now, in
Okay.
your case, obviously, I think it's necessary, but I have enough seats for every student. They should be there for most of the time. I don't deduct points for every absence, but after 3 or 4 absences, they start losing points.
And you're tracking based on what you're used when you say that.
Yeah.
I actually no, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I was gonna say I do pre-recorded videos once I've taught a class enough. I mean, it takes forever to do, but the video and the audio quality's I think much better than the webcasts, and you could break it into little chunks that are more digestible, like 5 to 7 minutes instead of this 50 to 90 minute.
So how does that play out? Like, is that being shown separately? Like,
Oh, it's there. So students who don't come to class, they just watch the pre-recorded version instead, and it's close enough that they can do either. Because I also get like 25% of people, but I basically just accepted that as I have to because of the room, but also it's actually, I don't know if it's across the whole campus, but certainly in computer science, there's a very strong culture that some 50 to 70% of people don't go to lecture. Yeah.
I wonder with your enterprise, as you described it, which is what I feel like mine's a bit that way, but yours is clearly a whole different scale. Do you have GSIs actually teaching sections?
Oh, yeah. Is that not normal?
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
No, that's right. So they are teaching sections,
Oh, yeah,
but they're
yeah.
also doing all these other things. So are there undergraduates then?
Oh,
teaching
yeah.
the sections?
Yep. And I think it works well in this specific discipline
Right.
because 61A and B, those intro courses, I think someone that actually just learned it last semester could be actually very effective as a GSI. In the discrete math course that you take in CS, I'm much more scared of that because there's so many weird blind alleys that a novice expert can run into. But in these classes, the material, just there's something about it that a novice can actually avoid bad habits in teaching.
And are they being paid?
Oh, yeah.
They're
Yeah.
being paid, and they're
The regular
getting,
rate. Yeah, the
fee remission as well.
Oh, yeah.
So that leads me to, a concern I've had with my enterprise in that last fall I had 10 GSIs, this time 9, and now 8.
Yeah.
So the department has a new set of standards around GSI allocation going
Yeah.
from 45 students per GSI to 70 students, like that.
Wow.
And they're still giving me, that extra GSI to have a head GSI.
Yeah.
And I've been told that, quite privileged in that. So it really undermines the system I have in place because it was designed to work in a certain way. So
Yeah.
I've had to adapt a lot. That's why I asked about the weekly responses. I've had to reduce those, figure out ways to streamline all of that. But Yeah, I think there were probably differences across departments
Mhm.
in the funds available and the scale of things. Yeah.
I mean, I think all of our TIS money does come through the usual channels. Like, it's not like, well, engineering has a bunch of money, so we, I don't know, somehow dip into that. It's just, I think we just have an insane number of students. And we've managed, I think 8-hour GSIs, we would be totally underwater if we didn't have 8-hour GSIs, because they don't have free remission. Yeah. And that's why we have to be very, very, very careful. We just had a whole like grievance issue because we have to make sure that they're at 8 hours. And they are largely undergrad. So it's sort of a little different because I think in other departments, I mean, your grad students really are dependent on that GSI funding. And that's just not really, I think that's a sort of unique thing. We can take the 8-hour GSIs because of the fact that that's not how we're funding our grad students. Yeah. We also, by the way, our allocation is we're given a dollar amount. And we basically allocate according to the dollar amount that we actually have to pay out for 8, 10, 15, 20-hour GSIs. And that's something that changed about 5 years ago. Because it used to be, you get so many GSI hours, but then people would be like, well, 10-hour GSIs are great. I'll hire a bunch of those. And we were like so underwater on money. And we had a semester where we basically had to beg to get enough money to run our classes. Because we had to turn away like a crazy number of people in fall 2016. So things are better now, but yeah, that was some way above my pay grade battles that happened with that one.
Well, speaking of GSIs, we have the director here of the GSI Teaching and Research Center. And Linda, I was wondering if you would like to chime in on how GSIs are being trained to handle the scaling that's going on, and any other thoughts you're having about the scale-up issue as pertains to the GSIs.
Happy to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. I was wondering if I could kind of get a sense of who's in the room first.
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand
I wanna know
who I'm
too.
talking to. I know some folks, but maybe we could just go around and say name and department or.
Yeah.
I'm Judy Stern, I'm with ETS, and I try and support
Yes.
faculty in various ways.
Mhm.
Taking large classes and stuff.
I'm Anita Ferris Comendo. I teach through the Goldman School of Public Policy.
Sam Nguyen, I'm ETS as well, I'm Judy's colleague, I'm support lead, so some of the questions or conversations surrounding things like clickers and course capture are, and all of it is interesting to me, but as it pertains to my role, those are some areas that I support.
I'm Allison Bloomfield Meyer. I teach at Haas and at the Rady School of Management at UC San Diego.
I'm Michael Meyer. I came all the way from UC San Diego for this, and I have a joint appointment between the business school, the Rady School of Management, and the design, our new design school.
I'm Corinne Riddell, I teach biostatistics in the School of Public Health.
Sabri, Department of Situation Planning. Regina News Studies. I'm Tammy Mao, I'm the Lab Instruction Manager for Integrated Biology. I'm Lynn Wambach,
Okay, now I just was trying to get a
Yeah,
sense,
great.
and I know a lot of your GSIs and all the
Mhm.
different things going on. So a few things, what we hear from GSIs, well, let me just say first, as these courses scale up, it becomes increasingly important that faculty have an understanding of how to work well with GSIs, okay? And you used the term management before, and Marty Olney, who teaches, the large economics course, is a legend here on campus. She talked about the fact, and it's really true, we have an annual seminar for faculty on how to teach well with GSIs, and Marty has been a presenter at that, and has talked about the fact that faculty are not trained in how to manage a group, a teaching team, and so on and so forth. And some are probably, have a more natural affinity to doing it than others. So one of the things that we've done at the center is to create a checklist. So first I want to make sure I get this out to you, and it's also on our website. But these are just general guidelines from faculty. They're all from faculty and GSIs about how to work well with GSIs and things specifically to do. Now, I can tell you, I teach right now 30 GSIs in their required seminar. All GSIs are required to take a seminar in their first semester of teaching on how to teach. And in the spring, not all departments have the resources to teach their own course. And so I offer a course, and it is a very important way for me to hear directly from first-time GSIs about their experiences in teaching. And I can tell you that the area that is the most problematic is in the area of grading. And so as these courses scale up, or even when they're small, the setting out the expectations for GSIs about, what they're responsible for and to be actually doing part of the grading with them, I think is essential. Because what happens is that many people just sort of push this off to the GSIs, they're gonna do the grading. They need guidance, okay? And they need for you to have some clear policies about grading, about regrades. They need faculty to sit at the beginning when you're grading a paper together, an assignment, of actually walking through a few samples together, of using a common rubric so that there's equity across the sections, and then having a meeting perhaps before returning grades or whatever to kind of see whether or not everybody used this rubric equitably, so to speak. So the idea here is there is a lack of communication that I see. I'm not saying that you have a lack of communication that you do, but I'm just trying to talk about what are the things that the graduate students tell us. Now, in terms of the increase in the student numbers and the increase then in the numbers of students that the graduate students have in their sections or that they have to grade. I mean, we work a lot with graduate students on how to make the large discussion section feel small. So many of the active learning strategies that you're talking about in lecture are precisely the things that we have graduate students or teach graduate students how to do in their own section. And some of the things that you've mentioned, for example, Kurt, your extra credit, Nick Vogue at Princeton, who used to be here on the Berkeley campus, he calls it extra learning. So that, in a sense, it's not about points, it's about extra learning, so to speak. The fact that you, Emily, grade with your GSIs is absolutely, I think, imperative. Some faculty split the grading up and others just have all the GSIs do it and it's sort of their thing. And that is the way for a course to become quickly dysfunctional. The other issue that's really, really important is communication with your GSIs right from the start. You may not know that the Graduate Council has a policy that faculty are required to meet regularly with their GSIs and also to set up a pre-semester meeting to go over the syllabus with the GSIs, to clarify expectations, what the GSI role is, but also to have an understanding of precisely what you said. What's the relationship of section to the larger, what we're calling, lecture, but of course we know that unidirectional transmission of knowledge is not what we're doing anymore, right? Okay, so sometimes what happens in these situations when you start doing the flipped classroom and the active learning, some GSIs start thinking, oh, wait a minute, that's my territory. Okay, so one of the things that you need to do is to make sure that whatever you're doing in the lecture, that they see this narrative or this course structure, that they also see all of these pieces and how they fit together. What are the goals for the sections? What are the goals for the lecture? Okay? And communicating this up front with the GSIs is extremely important, okay? And communicating with them on a regular basis throughout the semester. So in a sense, and I want to say this, in their appointment letters, you're listed as their supervisor, okay? And even though faculty don't like to think of themselves as supervisors, you are in charge, for example, of any performance issues that come up or any type of, we had a situation the other day where I was contacted where one GSI took on this role of head GSI, even though it wasn't head GSI. And the issue was that the faculty member hadn't taken control of the course in the sense that he hadn't met regularly, he hadn't established a framework to work with the GSIs, a time for a regular meeting. One of the things I see, for example, faculty sometimes, if you don't set a regular time, they're trying to manage everybody's schedule, along the way, and one person had a GSI meeting at 9 p.m. Well, that's not acceptable. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's really not. People have children, people have families and all that. So what the GSIs want to make sure is that when the things get scaled up, that if they are asked to grade more students, that you clearly think through with them, how much time does it take to grade each one of those papers? And in fact, the biggest issue sometimes that comes up, and we can talk about the undergraduate GSI issue too, but is that faculty sometimes don't have a sense of how long it takes for a graduate student to actually grade a paper. So it's very important that you sit down and you roll up your sleeves, and you grade a couple of papers too, so you can say, okay, I think this should take half hour, or 15 minutes, okay? And if the GSI is putting in too much time into grading, then you need to show them ways to reduce the amount of time. So frequently, for example, everybody's writing all over the test or whatever, use a rubric, because that's one thing that can really create efficiencies, right? If a GSI comes to you and says they're working more than they're paid, 20 hours a week for 50%, 10 for 25, it is, of course, your responsibility to try to figure out what's happening. Are they putting too much time into each paper? Or is this work too much? And so then you have to do what I think Kurt might have said, is scale back the number of assessments that you're doing with student learning, or have, there are, of course, many things, the low stakes quizzes or whatever that the students can be looking at themselves, even in class or whatever. Hire additional staff if possible. Readers, for example, although I find readers to be not always a very functional kind of position, because they're very sort of disembodied from the class and the whole thing, and they don't have that rapport that we know in the research on learning is important, the contact with the instructor. It's one of the primary principles of best practices, is to make sure that the students can have contact with the instructor, whether it be the GSI or the faculty member. So it's primarily in the area of grading that things are coming up in terms of things being scaled up, and the reduction in the number of GSIs. Even if it's the same number of students, there's a reduction in the GSIs. I mean, there is a very major shift happening on the campus, in my opinion, in terms of the teaching staff. Josh has mentioned it in terms of undergraduates teaching. It's also the case, the one I see the most is there are more master's students teaching as GSIs and teaching in departments other than their own. Okay, this is a paradigm shift on this campus, and it will continue in that way because the professional schools are growing, and the PhD programs, even though they haven't decreased as much as people may imagine, there's more fellowship funding for graduate students now than there used to be, and so they're teaching fewer semesters as GSIs. So what you have to think about is, does this person have the same content knowledge and background of the GSIs maybe that you have? And it's important then to assess right up front what their teaching experience is and what they bring to the course. Much like you would assess your students at the beginning point in order to understand how to pitch your course and moving through, to understand where the GSI's strengths may be and where there may need some support. The other things I see is communication with the students and with the GSIs. So I see a lot of cases where and I don't want to make it sound like the faculty's the bad guy or anything like this. I don't mean that, but they're unintentional. And in fact, there's often good intentions where the faculty member wants to be kind to a student, they're going to revise the grade. The GSI feels completely undermined. So set up a format for communication with your GSIs and with the students. So do you want to be always copied maybe on the emails to the students, or will you copy your GSIs, for example, on your emails out to students? Keep them in the loop, okay? So the better the communication structure, the better you can, the outcomes will be. Clearly, the GSIs are one of the best ways for you to understand how the course is going. Christina Maslach used to say this all the time about the reason why she found GSI so important is they understand from the perspective of the students, because they have more one-on-one contact, how the course is going from the perspective of the students. Conveying that back to the faculty is an important role that GSIs can do, okay? So, these are things we're seeing, but I would say it's primarily, so for example, the other day we talked about a situation which one of my students in my class had way too many, she felt, too many papers to grade for what she's being paid for. And we talked about strategies. I said, the first thing to do is talk to the instructor of record, because you're in charge. And really, you want to take that, in a way where you see the GSIs helping you teach a better course. And also, your role is helping GSIs in a way develop their teaching skills at the same time. Much of the learning on how to teach happens in the site of the individual course with the faculty member. not just in the pedagogy course, not just in our certificate program or whatever. So you have an incredibly important role to play. And in this checklist, we've, laid out a lot of the things that you can do to make things run smoothly in your course, okay? But anyway, getting back to that student who was saying that she had the GSI, who had way too many papers, and someone mentioned grade scope in the class. And so if there are tools that can be used to make the grading process more efficient, make sure you use them, okay? Because this will help you work with the GSIs in a way that can keep their time focused more on the really active learning with the students in the classroom and with formative feedback on their work so that they can move their, the students can see where they need to put more effort. Okay, so this issue of grading is huge and important. I love the fact of hearing about the low stakes quizzes. This is what the literature and the research on learning, Art Shimomura, Professor Emeritus from Psychology, talks about the generation effect, which is low stakes quizzes. One of the best ways for students to learn is to demonstrate their knowledge in short low stakes quizzes. Games, our colleague here mentioned what did you say? This wonderful, about these natural teaching moments, games. Think about the work of Alison Gopnik of exploratory learning. So these are things that we talk with graduate students about doing in their section, but they can be done in their courses, of course, as well. So that's where I mean that you're doing a lot of things in the lecture that GSIs can learn from, but the things that I see as weakest often are issues of attention to communication and the needs and support of GSIs in the grading process. Okay, so there's a lot that you can do. But I would lay out the expectations, lay out the roles of all the team members, and find a way to, as Josh talked about, a feedback loop among the teaching staff as well. At the end of the semester, Steve Vogel in political science, one thing he does is he has the GSIs write a letter to the next team of GSIs about what things they did that worked well, what things would they do differently. He also has I think he has them write him also something about, what could be improved in the course and what should be changed and whatever. So see the GSIs as a really good source of input as these things are changing. And I know that many of you are doing a great job because I've heard about all of you from your GSIs as well. And so, just keep up the good work with that. But it's issues of efficiency with grading and clarity and expectations and using some standard protocols like grading rubrics and so on and so forth. I was so happy to hear that you're not grading on a curve. I find grading on the curve to be unethical, to be quite honest, because it is not grading according to learning outcomes that you're trying to achieve. It's grading students in competition with one another. And it tends to reduce collaboration. And when you're grading based on certain criteria that you have set for student learning and outcomes, you definitely have a better chance of keeping your teaching activities aligned with those outcomes and the assessments aligned with the goals and the activities, what falls in the literature and aligned or integrated course. Okay, so anyway, these are all, I loved hearing what you're saying. You're using games, you're using case studies, all of these things are great.
Thank you so much, Linda. Other questions that you have, not only for Linda, but the rest of the panel?
I have one question. So, I am interested in assessment strategies, and especially when it's quizzes, it's easy to rate whether students made the answer right or wrong. Or on the other side of it, it's like creating YouTube videos or something. It's very clear to see if we put more effort than others. But like you talk about online discussion, there's some instructors that say they will grade it by the number of postings, but then that quality is hard to control, and some just say simple responses and try to meet that expectation. How would you come up with your strategy on assessing online discussions and post that are comments?
For me, in the situations where we've had online discussions, they go into the same pool with just participation. And so the same way you might have those students who are always the first one to raise their hand, but they say something really banal, and you know, figure out how to account for the fact that they are trying to be involved, but like, you know, I think many of us would probably prefer the student who raises their hand once every class, but says something, you know, meaningful. So for me, those go into that bucket of, you know, of points. But, you know, it's one thing I was wondering about, Kurt, how you handle the end of semester where you give different formats for final projects, how you compare, because I think that's really compelling and would be a great option, you know, to adopt as well. I've done these different assignment forms, like YouTube videos or a podcast or something, but it's always been all the students doing the same one. So it's, you know, equitable across the grade. I give them a rubric that accounts for the creative, you know, creativity, for the completeness, for the polish, for the, you know, proper citation skill. Like I just adapt my rubric from papers over to the more creative projects. But when you're doing it across students at the same time, how do you make sure it's not like one's the easy one to get an A and one is like the harder route
Right.
or something?
I've tried to get feedback over the years from students and GSIs about that. I have something like 12 different options. Students can, as I said, do an arts project. They can do a K through 12 curriculum development project in environmental studies types of stuff. They can develop a decal course. They can do an individual paper. They can write a policy brief. They can engage with a community partner, which is, you know, volunteer work almost. I mean, public service work. It's completely of a different nature. So I don't have a good answer for you. But what I think is that there are, with those, I think that in the way I divide the class up into, okay, we're assessing learning of content and concepts and development of facility to apply concepts across content in the exams and so on. And then in the final project, we're giving people a little more leeway. And certainly effort, for instance, I explicitly say, you need to put in 30 hours, and we have a 30 to 40 hours actually, I say, and we have a progress report halfway through, and they have to document the tasks they've undertaken, the resources they've accumulated, how they're gonna get to the end, and so on. And then in the end, they have another little follow-up progress report or final report on it and saying, okay, what have I done? So we can see how much they put in, and then we can look at the quality of their work. Now, judging it across is difficult, so in that sense, there is, I'd maybe call it a spontaneous curve. You know, it's inevitable
Well,
in
that's
some
different
ways.
though. I mean, you're still judging them according to sort of their learning rather than in reference to each other.
I mean, I just think that it's a place where we are explicit about, we prize creativity and risk-taking and engagement with material and quality of product, but it's gonna range so much if you're making a 10-minute YouTube video and you've never done anything like that before. And we have some scaffolding, we have workshops, we have a series of workshops for each different type of final project option. So in that, we also assess what's going on with the students kind of surreptitiously a little bit and kind of gauge the quality of their work, the skills they're bringing and so on. So it's definitely not a science, it's an art, and that's something we need to work on more.
And is that something you really look at your GSIs for these workshops and for the keeping track along the way?
Yes, and we have workshops to put together the workshops. And the other thing I do with the GSIs more than anything, I think that you didn't mention, or maybe implied to say, I try my best to have overlapping cohorts of GSIs where I have experience in place and I lean on them a lot, and always my head GSI is a person like that. And I really set up opportunities for them to interact and extend the knowledge from the previous semester. We have an archive of lesson plans, and all sorts of materials that they pass on to one another. Every time they do a lesson plan, they put it into that archive, and we have a whole file titling protocol for that, so you can tell what's going on. And then I have my head GSI organize all that stuff. And so I think that's, I think that's really quite valuable in creating a scaffolding for the GSIs and then having that kind of translate into the experience of the students. Yeah, the unbiased assessment is tough.
No, part of it is picking the project that will allow an individual to demonstrate best their own knowledge as well. So it's baked into the
Well, it is, but I don't want to discourage them from taking risks too, so.
Yes.
When you talk about these distinct projects and grading and assessment and rubrics, it reminds me about how do you evaluate, I don't know how to say this, how do you make sure that you're grading students fairly? And my work is very high touch, so I get to the point where I really know the students and I really like some of them. And I'm really annoyed with some of them. So I'm wondering, how do you manage making sure, in spite of liking the principle, psychological principle of liking, how do you still stay clear in your assessments? Do you have any tips? I mean, I know what I do.
I feel like having very detailed, clear rubrics is helpful, and you just have to be honest and stick with it. It's also helpful for your GSIs to have that, and so everyone's just grading the same way.
I mean, in our case, the main differentiator in terms of your letter grade is your exams, and the exams are all graded on Gradescope, so nobody knows any idea who anybody is. So it doesn't really come into play as far as I know. Not much room.
I do have that issue the same way, you know,
Yeah.
that it's a lot of, part of their grade comes out of participation and, you know, but the rubrics, using a rubric has really helped in, you know, both bringing up students who are very quiet in class, but then turn in this amazing work, but have very little like knowledge of who they are as people. And on the other side of the person who, you know, dominates discussion and then goes to turn in their work, and you like, it's just, it doesn't match the person you seem to have in class, and you know, it keeps me from sort of just giving them extra, you know, an extra boost just because they're, you know, a delightful presence in my class, because that's accounted for elsewhere in their grade, right? Like if their written work is not strong, that's, you know, it helps to break down all the different categories where, and focus the grading to be, you know, compare a bit more, but I hear you.
Yeah, I mean, what I do is I pick up a student paper, see the name, and then I go, before reading it, what's my assessment of what I probably think I'll read?
Oh, cool.
And then I do a metric.
Yeah.
There's certain people I just assume based on prior work.
Mm-hmm.
To remind myself, I have a
bias.
perspective already. I'm trying to catch my own bias,
Yeah.
which is,
Yeah.
because after 10 years of teaching one class, I see patterns.
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
certain students who just get a better grade, and
The other thing you can do, I mean, it used to be called blind grading, it's called anonymous grading now,
yeah,
and,
it doesn't work with the material I do, and it's a great idea.
why doesn't it work?
I'm teaching it leadership, and it's all about how do you show up as a person. So
Yeah.
you tell
So you know the
stories,
individual.
they're building professional development plans, they're doing various exercises where they're observed and evaluated and giving feedback by their peers. So it's very high touch, and I know every student.
No, but I mean, yeah, okay, but sometimes when people even know the students, they are not do grading anonymously on some things. And then you look at the material, of course, afterward, because you wanna know how the student did. But instead of having their name at the beginning, you know, looking at
I
their name
see.
before you grade it, that you would look at the work, grade it, and then look at who it is. Because you have to give an individual feedback and track how they're doing. But there are some aspects of doing this, or if there are multiple components to have, and you have what, one GSI? How many GSIs do you have?
It depends on the class.
Yeah, so, I mean, I know Martha Olney and a lot of people with the grading where they break down the, you know, let's say there's 3 components to an assignment, one GSI does one, another.
So-
And those things can help sometimes, but
Yeah.
maybe it's not, as you said, I mean, maybe so individual, your, you know, what you're doing and the assignments and things, that it might not work that way, but those are just some.
I mean, like with my last undergrad class with about 75 students, their final paper, they had 5 questions, they had to pick 2 to answer, so we had a rubric for each question. My TA and I both independently read every single paper.
Yeah.
We didn't completely agree, of course I win because I'm the instructor of record. But it was very helpful to have 2 perspectives, and if I had had another person to read them, that would have been even more valuable. But we always knew whose paper we were reading in that case, and we could have anonymized it. That was handwritten. Anyway,
It seems like a balance because
Yeah.
I want my GSIs to know their students and be able to give them sort of custom tailored feedback. And so we, on early assignments, have them do that. But then on our exams, we make sure that none of the GSIs grade their own students, so they have no idea.
oh, that's nice.
And then when I set up these different final projects, we have what I call project coordinators. And so they take on the students who are doing that different type, right? So any given student's likely to have 3 different people assessing them over the course of the semester.
Well, we're in our final minutes. One last question.
Well, we talk a lot about the student's experience and the broader teaching team's experience and how we manage that. As you scale to these kind of enterprise scale classes, how do you not lose the enjoyable bits of teaching? Right? Because I don't want to just, I'm facing this question. I can either scale a class or start giving it over to other faculty to teach. And I don't want to scale it to a point where I lose that enjoyable feeling of actually teaching people. That I want to just manage an enterprise. How do you do that?
I mean, I think in my case, since one of the most important things I feel like my job actually is behind the scenes is building the homeworks and the projects. And actually, the more people, the more I feel like it matters, because I know that any change I make to the homework is going to consume hundreds or thousands of human hours of time. So in that sense, like the homework and project and the exam part, I mean, it's more stressful, but actually it's more satisfying because I know I'm reaching this big audience. I found that in terms of the building human connections part, which is incredibly important to me, I only get to know, 40 or 50 out of 1,500 students. But I do still get to know the front row crew and the office hours at Hendy's and all that. And so it still seems good. And actually, this is a whole other angle when you have a giant TA team. You're getting to know them as these like leaders within the department. So in my case, it kind of falls out naturally. I'd say in my department, about a third of the faculty are really into the big classes. There's a lot who are kind of neutral, and then there's maybe slightly less than a third who feel like this is not good for them. So I think almost it's a bit of an individual thing. Like I wouldn't have it any other way. The bigger the better, personally. But that's just me. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree, exactly. Like the bigger it is, the more people I can teach about human physiology, which I think is really important to learn. And you still have some interactions with some of the students, and they are appreciative of this, so that works for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also teach small classes, so there's a balance in my portfolio that it doesn't end up dominated by big classes.
I have a certain balance in that way too, but I really love the performative aspect of it, which is great. You get up on stage and you have some fun with it. There's also the impact, cumulative. I'm approaching about 10,000 students now that I've taught, so that's exciting. And I've also, as a lecturer who doesn't have a lab, I've actually learned to leverage my students for my own research and interests through assignments and so on. And the more I can do that at scale, the more I can get out of it, and the more it gives them an opportunity to interact along the lines of a research project.
And I remember one more thing, which is that some faculty in my department, specifically John De Niro, he actually does a small bonus lecture for each week. And then the students who are really, really interested in the material, he teaches a 30-person class. That's a subclass of his 1,600 person.
I have a voluntary discussion section.
Yeah.
Like 12 people come to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really good trick. Yeah. I teach freshman seminar to do the same thing. So, yeah.
Great way to end today's session. Thank you so much. If you'd like to stay.